Hello and welcome to the final regular assignment. You are just about all done with your class. So you should have already downloaded the worksheet because you're an old pro by now, right? And be following along, ready to fill in some of the blanks as we talk about testing and contact tracing, which is kind of the final piece of the puzzle here. It's where we go next after we finally emerge from our caves and shave off our enormous COVID beards and start wearing real clothes again and stuff. Like how are we going to get back to some sort of new normal? And this is it. Some states have already been successful at containing their outbreaks. Unfortunately, not Massachusetts. I think we're had 150 deaths a day last time I checked. It's pretty scary out there right now. But, directly north of us in Vermont, they've got like 5 new cases a day. So they've started to ease some of the social distancing guidelines. And this has got people wondering, oh, is it almost over? Are we going to get back to normal? No. We will find some sort of new normal, but we won't get back to the way that things were before all of this happened until we've built up enough herd immunity to prevent the virus from creating another outbreak. If we just start going back to the way things were, then we'll just have another outbreak and people will start dying again. So there's 2 ways that this could happen. We could let 90% of the population get the virus. Probably not the best way to go. Hopefully that doesn't have to happen. Or we can develop an effective vaccine. But that also is going to take at least a year, probably 2, maybe longer. So in the meantime, social distancing might diminish, but it's not going to completely disappear. So what are we going to do in the meantime? I mean, I'm going crazy here, right? There's no way that we can live like this forever. Well, the good news is that once the outbreak has diminished to the point where new infections are rare, like in Vermont and a few other places, we can actually mitigate the virus using a technique called contact tracing. That's essentially when they just find confirmed cases and trace their contacts, find the people that they've come into contact with, and they mandate them to quarantine, and the rest of us get to go about our business. So it's sort of the same thing that we're doing now, but in a targeted approach rather than this just like blanket shut everything down. And there's been some discussion about whether or not such a simple thing could really work to contain this massive pandemic. But contact tracing is a proven tool. We've used it to contain lots of different outbreaks in the past of diseases that were even more contagious. You remember that measles has a basic reproductive rate of 11 to 18, which is somewhere between 9 and 3 times the reproductive rate of COVID. So if it works against measles, it'll work against COVID. The thing, though, is that we need testing in order to make that happen. All public health experts and most politicians agree we can't ease social distancing measures until we have access to widespread effective testing. Well, why not? Well, in order for contact tracing to be effective, you need to actually know who is infected. You can't trace the contacts of people that you don't know even exist out there. Now, this is especially important for COVID because, as we learned, up to 50% of cases can be mild or completely asymptomatic. So what are these tests? How do they work? This is a science class. We're not just talking about, the social aspect of things here, although we are sort of bridging into that. Let's talk about the science behind the tests. Well, there's 2 of them. So there's the diagnostic test, which is what the doctor orders if they suspect that somebody has COVID, if they have an active COVID-19 infection. And it'll work by checking for the presence of the COVID RNA, its genetic material. So a sample is collected from deep inside a patient's nose. They take this long swab, it's like that long, and stick it way up in there, and basically like the place where your nose meets your mouth. They have to scrape the back of that and try and collect some mucus, which is difficult and painful to do. They then take that sample, run it through a process called RT-PCR, which stands for reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction. PCR is a common technique used to multiply DNA, but since it doesn't use DNA, we have to add the reverse transcriptase part, which turns the RNA into DNA, so we can then multiply that genetic material and tag it with a fluorescent marker, so that a positive sample then glows in the dark. That's how they know that you have it, is it literally will start to glow. So some of you may have heard of another type of test in addition to the diagnostic test called an antibody test. This test doesn't look for the virus directly. Instead, it tests for the antibodies that your immune system develops to fight the virus. We have two different tests for a reason, and we need them both, and I'll get to that. But first, let's talk about the problems with testing, because ultimately problems with testing are the root of all of our problems here. A structural problem with testing in the US has been the lack of tests from the beginning. We still don't have enough. Can you believe it? Here we are, isolated for a month, and we still don't have enough tests. Many other countries started producing the serums and tools that they needed for testing at the initial outbreak in Wuhan back in November, or even beforehand, since this pandemic has been predicted for years now. And this meant that when the pandemic arrived, they were ready, and we were not. Instead, only people that needed to be hospitalized were tested. My downstairs neighbor had COVID. They told her to go home because she didn't need to be hospitalized. That gave it to another person in my building, and probably me. Shoot, I probably am infected. It's a good thing I'm isolating. But mild to moderate cases remain undiagnosed in the general population. And this is what allowed the virus to spread so widely that now we, the most developed nation in the world, are the epicenter of the pandemic. We always have to be the top. God. Another problem, though, is that the diagnostic tests have been shown to have a false negative rate of about 30%. So nearly 1/3 of people who test negative actually are infected and can get other people sick. And these false negatives are for two reasons. One is that you need enough RNA, you need enough virus for the test to pick it up. So patients that have really mild cases or who are almost recovered, they just don't have enough virus to be detected. So they're sent home to go get other people sick. And then the tests are also difficult to administer as well. You remember me telling you how long and painful the swab is. So sometimes the technician won't do a good enough job, or the person jerks their head away because it really hurts, and it doesn't get deep enough to collect a viable sample. So if you understand what we were just talking about, you should be able to answer these questions. So why can't antibody testing be used to diagnose patients? Think about the nature of the immune system, right? If you're showing early signs of COVID-19 infection, can't antibody test you? Which type of test would then be effective at detecting asymptomatic carriers in the population? Think about it. If you're asymptomatic, it's because your immune system is kicking butt. Clue. Yeah. Most public health experts argue that we need widespread application of both types of tests to begin contact tracing. That's because we need to know who has the disease, and we also need to know who had the disease. Why? Contact tracing is a lot of work. They need to not only monitor and find every single person that is a confirmed case, they need to find out who all of their contacts were, starting from when their initial exposure to an infected person was, up to when they started showing symptoms and quarantining. They need to figure out every person that they interacted with in that span of time, which could be weeks, right? So it's a lot of work. And then they need to follow up with all of those people and get them to quarantine too. This is no ordinary outbreak either. This is a global pandemic. We haven't had anything like this in at least 100 years. And recent figures estimate that in order to do contact tracing on this level, the federal government's going to have to cough up $3.6 billion and hire at least 100,000 people to interview and evaluate the cases. And that's just to run the program. On top of that, they need to support people because, as we all know, being quarantined is difficult. It sucks. You might lose your job. You might have to move into a different place. Some people might be unable to isolate in their current living conditions. So housing and other services might need to be provided for them. So it's going to be a massive undertaking. Some of us learn by pictures. Here's a nice graphic that illustrates how this all works. Confirmed case. Find out their contacts. Oh, if the contacts show symptoms or test positive, because they're constantly monitoring them, then they find their contacts and complete this iterative process until they've basically got every person that has been in contact with a confirmed case in isolation or treatment. Unless they catch it early, maybe they won't have any contacts, and then the buck stops there. But this is the scary part: is they're going to miss some people. So that's where we bring technology to the rescue. At the time I'm writing this, the U.S. is reporting its 1 millionth confirmed case, which is a third of all the confirmed cases in the world. Now, keep in mind, those are just the confirmed cases. The actual number of cases, we've talked about this, it's probably at least double that, maybe even more. So even this army of contract tracers that the government's planning to employ might not be enough, which is where technology to the rescue, right? State and national governments worldwide have begun developing contact tracing apps to help with this, but so have Google and Apple. Now, Google and Apple, you might be thinking, wait a minute, aren't they usually fierce competitors? Don't they share a lot of the same markets in technology? Well, they do, but they've collaborated to come up with a contact tracing app of their own because they are the ones who have the phones, right? We're talking about apps on phones. Apple makes all the phones, and Google, Android, they make all the phones too. So actually, I don't know if Google and Android are the same thing. I probably should have looked that up before I said it to you. You look it up. You tell me in the comment section on the video if I just totally messed up. But anyway, they're coming up with their own app. So now governments are trying to decide, should we keep working on developing these apps, or should we just opt for the Google Apple app? Read the article and tell me what you think, right? So this article from Business Insider, I'm using them again. I used them for the last one. I'm growing to like them more and more, but kind of breaks it down for you. And each one has its pros and cons, right? There's no clear-cut answer here, but welcome to life. So I want to see at least 2 pros and 2 cons for both sides of the argument. Tell me 2 reasons why maybe we should just keep those government-developed apps. What are 2 reasons why maybe we should go with the Apple, Google? What are 2 things that bring about some cause for concern for each of those as well? And then based on that, what's your opinion? What do you think that we should do? And there is no wrong answer to this particular question. So feel free to just, synthesize the information and tell me what you think. But one thing is true is that this is going to be really important, and I can't wait for us to move into this phase so that some of us at least can go back to living our normal lives. And hey, you seniors, I don't think that you need a lot of qualifications to be a contract tracer. If you really liked this class and you're about to graduate, maybe you should try and be one of those 100,000 people that they hire to do this. Go out there and become a budding epidemiologist. That would be super sweet. I would be very proud to have been your science teacher. So this is Mr. Ben signing off for the final video of Biology of a Pandemic. You guys be well out there. it is still scary. This thing it's going to be around for a while. So be safe. I hope you use the things that you learned in this class.